you're saying that the closer to the source, the analytics, probably the better off everyone is, because by the time you're asking an analytics team to get their hands dirty, if the data hasn't been optimized, then you've lost a lot of value.
I'm saying more is that if you were to be able to look across the data from multiple pharmaceuticals as a CRO, and of course, whether or not you can do that depends on what's in your contracts. It also depends on how you use privacy preserving federated learning. So how do you use the technology as well as what did you put into your contracts? Then you can start to learn completely new things that no one company, no one organization on their own can discover.
That's interesting.
Welcome to Analyzing Healthcare podcast, brought to you by Scale Community. Scale Community is a global healthcare-focused member network where healthcare leaders come to connect, learn, share ideas, and shape what's next in our evolving healthcare landscape. To take advantage of all that Scale Community has to offer, from expansive content to virtual and in-person events, to interactive peer networking opportunities, and more, check out Scale Community at www.scale-community.com. Membership options range from free to paid, so if you enjoyed today's discussion, please take a moment to sign up for your preferred membership level.
All right, welcome to the latest edition of Analyzing Healthcare, the Scale Community podcast. I am joined with Angeli, is a pharma data scientist who has focused on analytics, clinical analytics, and data management throughout her entire career, working at respected premier life science companies like Zolke and Bayer and Roche, where she was frequently the head of global data and head of data integration and informatics. So this is a long-running career path for Angeli. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here.
My absolute pleasure. Today, you're running your own asset or startup called Sequoia Growth, not to be confused with Sequoia Venture Capital. Sequoia focused on the consulting needs that your various clients have with all things life sciences, data analytics related. And so I want to get into a number of different topics. I find your space endlessly fascinating and subject to exponential change. Things are moving ever faster in clinical research, data analytics, and obviously the role of artificial intelligence and now quantum computing. So let's jump in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan. As you know, because we've spoken before, I had the honor of being able to work really hands-on in research for the first 10 years of my career. So in the lab and then in clinical trial design. And then I went over to the data science side and was able to get really deep with the data structures, the data modeling, but also how machine learning can be used. And I was really privileged to be able to do that work at Bayer and at Roche, and then to offer consulting services in that space as the head of health for Zolke. Now with Sequoia Growth, one of the gaps that I'm trying to really bridge is that a lot of consultancy comes with this fantastic commercial business knowledge, but a lot of missing domain knowledge. So can you talk to a consultant about how to increase your probability of technical success in your pipeline, or about how to transform a clinical trial so your clinical development time is much shorter if they've never had to do that work themselves? And so in our network of experts, we've tried to really focus on colleagues who have a minimum of 10 years experience, but are also thought leaders in their area of clinical trial design, of improving technical success, be that with CAR-T, be that with single chain antibodies, be that in the small molecule space, or be it in one particular therapeutic area. I would say, although our speciality is very technical, and we can talk about more about quantum computing in a moment, we still always say the heart of everything we have to do must be the business outcomes, because to have patient outcomes, your business has to be sustainable. It has to be profitable. And we're not afraid of that. We know that that's important to be able to sustainably deliver meaningful healthcare.
So what I'm hearing you say in layman's terms, which resonates with me, is it's very helpful to get the full benefits of today's most cutting edge AI and all things digitization, if you're superimposing those benefits on an existing foundation of clinical research acumen. operational acumen. Much harder if you're just starting at the end with a pure tech operational infrastructure and without that human component and that years of experience in everything operational. Is that fair? And that's certainly, if that's the case, that resonates with me because I've seen A and B in other areas within healthcare, all things back office. I've seen early stage startups that have grown very quickly offering AI solutions in RCM billing, which is a very US focused or centric department. Or I've seen AI superimposed into call centers, which is global, right?
Mhm.
And the difference between rapid adoption and optimization is usually these vendors and are these adopters applying human capital experience, or are they starting from scratch with pure software solutions? Is that what you're saying?
I think that's exactly it, Roy. And it's not that I don't see a huge value in the disruptors. So, of course, we've seen a lot of fantastic disruption in other industries in particular, so industries away from the healthcare sector. But if you look into the space where I'm busy with medtech, with biotech, pharma, and with hospitals, these are places where adoption has been slower. It's been slower globally. Some regions a bit faster than others. Singapore, for instance, is one that's moved a little faster. But behind all that, the fact is, does this work for a nurse? Does this actually work for a doctor? Will this make a pharmaceutical company more likely to pick you as a clinical trial site? Does this ultimately create a better patient experiences, particularly in areas where patients have choices about where they might like to go?
And when you were, point taken, when you worked at Bayer and at Roche managing global data, I imagine the data you focused on was A, pharmaceutical, B, clinical research orientated. Were you mostly receiving data from third-party CROs, clinical research organizations, and helping them along, or were you inward focused on your own labs, or was it a combination of both?
So absolutely a combination of both. And then I would add into there manufacturing data and also data that's relevant in the commercial space. So that comes into real world data. When a medicine is actually out with the patients, what are we seeing in terms of adherence? So are they actually taking the medicine? What are we seeing in terms of adverse events or outcomes out in the real world? One of the areas where we really focused is between departments, so between clinical development and research, between manufacturing and clinical development, and then out into the real world. Can we take that data, move it back into the pharmaceutical value stream, and then improve the product that we're bringing through that value stream? So I'll try to make that a little bit simpler. If we see, for instance, in manufacturing, that we're having some problem with the dissolvability of a particular formula, is that something we can learn from, bring it back into early research so that we start to design even better molecules from day one? And if we go into how that works into the clinical space, it is a clinical trial. Clinical development is a very expensive and time-consuming piece of work. So we know estimates of around $6 billion per drug. We know cycle times of 15 years. If we can shorten that, if we can get that innovation to patients faster by using real-world data to design a smarter clinical trial, then that's something that benefits everyone in the healthcare ecosystem. So data that solve these types of problems was where my focus was.
Very helpful. So you touched and interacted with data throughout not just the clinical research, but the entire continuum of drug development and drug application and medical devices too, it sounds like. So 50-50 split between both life science, med device, and pharma, or a greater weighting in A versus B?
Healthcare leaders, if your revenue cycle management is underwhelming you, it's time to rethink your current suite of solutions. Scale Healthcare's AI-powered RCM solutions are purpose-built to protect and accelerate revenue across the entire lifecycle. Denial Shield proactively prevents denials before claims ever go out, using agentic AI to automate root cause detection and resolution. Front Desk Shield streamlines preclinical and front-end workflows, eligibility, authorization, and intake, reducing friction before revenue is even created. And Revenue Shield maximizes charge capture and revenue integrity, ensuring nothing slips through the cracks. Together, the Shield suite helps organizations reduce operating costs, capture missed revenue, accelerate cash flow, and increase productivity without ripping and replacing existing systems. If you're ready for immediate ROI and measurable impact, visit scalehealthcare.com and see how the Shield Suite redefining AI-powered RCM.
I think it's different times with different focus. At Bayer, I had more of the research clinical focus, Roche more of the commercial pharma manufacturing focus, and then Sulka has a really strong medtech background. So they've been doing medtech since 68.
So both medtech and pharma covered both, the entire continuum from early stage, phase one, pre-phase one, project selection, all the way through to wide commercialization. And you've done it globally. You've looked at the role of data in different regions, Asia, Africa, Europe, the Americas. Is that also accurate? Have you focused in certain locations?
So that is accurate, but I think it's true to say, and I know that's one of the reasons, Rory, why you and I got connected, is that a lot of my work has focused ex-US. So even though I've supported some big clients in the United States, and my role at Bayer was truly global, covering the US as well, I would say the majority of my work has been in the Asia Pacific or the EMEA region or in Latin America. So there have been some significant projects in Brazil, which has a very interesting healthcare data landscape.
All right. So let's assume that we're building a solution with you at the heart of it. You're the AI within this solution, and the solution drives data gathering decision making. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do is optimize data for all clinical development and application, both devices and pharma. And you are the brain engine behind this. And you refer to your data set to drive this optimization exercise. And so the input assumptions, either or, that define your formula, your logic formula, are in-house large life science company labs versus outsourced, working with third parties who typically are probably smaller than Roche, if I had to guess. So large cap in-house versus mid cap, small cap outsourced. Second criteria is geography. Are we going Pacific? Are we going Europe? Are we going Africa? Americas? Where are we going for this data? Third criteria, and try to stay with me here. Third criteria is early stage clinical research data versus late stage in-market broad commercialization data, right? And then fourth is anything else that you want to add. AI-enabled versus quantum computing or traditional. Plus lessons that Angeli has learned along the years that are unique and proprietary to you. Hey, it's got to be a management team of X, 50 people, no less, no more. Other optimization inputs, lessons you've picked up along the way. Hey, make sure you have 3 years of funding runway. Otherwise, people get distracted with, sustainability concerns. People have to feed their kids. Where's the funding? Whatever else, it's not my space, it's your space. You've grown up in it. So if you were to build this formula with you as the engine, what would be the likely answers to some of those questions, those either or questions? And the goal is optimizing data. And why? Because when that data is optimized, we get the best results.
And so I was thinking about one of your earlier podcasts, Roy, just as you mentioned that, and that's the one with Carsten, who runs the World Health Summit here in Berlin, where I'm based. And in that, you talked about verticals and horizontals, and data is really a horizontal. So you're not, going after polio, you're not going after Alzheimer's disease, but you're going after a horizontal. Nonetheless, I would say I always start off with any client with saying, be careful, you're not just optimizing data. So you actually have a business or a medical challenge you want to go after. So a typical challenge that I get asked about at the moment is...
And I'm going to stop you then. So optimizing data horizontally means focusing on things like cleaning data, categorizing data.
Exactly. And I've seen people get lost in that, lost with a lot of money wasted, transparently, in that space, because if you're not clear on what is the business objective you want to
you end
solve,
up with data for the sake of data. Let's put that aside. Let's assume that we're disciplined and we really are very clear vertically about the flow of data that comes in and the output, which is the actual results that can be commercialized and fundamentally defendable in terms of efficacy, making patients healthier. So given all of that, yeah, what are your thoughts on these assumptions?
And I think the first thing is to think about, how is the data longitudinal? So not just have I got a snapshot of this data, but am I gathering it over a long period of time? Data and healthcare data really becomes valuable when it's across a patient's lifespan. So how am I really setting this up to cover for a long period of time? I would even say that I've often seen it more useful to collect a smaller number of parameters than to collect for a shorter period of time. So you've really got to think about time.
These are important points. So already our computer program is getting very smart, because most laymen, myself included, are focused on accelerating time. And our biggest frustration with the FDA, I'm US centric, is clinical research takes forever, like 10 years plus to go through multiple trials and get FDA approved. Why can't it take 6 months? Why can't all things be COVID vaccine driven? 12 months, we're done. And there's fundamental answers to that. You know, the quality of the data improves the more years you add to your evaluation. Okay.
Let's look at what we also learned from the pandemic there. So there are resources where data has been collected, where those upfront investments have been made. And so you asked me about geography, and I think geography is where the governments, the research institutes, the hospitals have made that earlier investment, where they had that foresight. UK Biobank is a well-known example. Mayo Clinic in the US is another fantastic, well-known and well-cited example, where they said in advance, we see the value in this. We're going to create those accessible, commercializable, clinical
library.
Exactly. And so when you have this urgent crisis, like a pandemic, or when you have a drug or a medical device on the market and you just want to expand it to a new disease area, which is a shorter amount of time, or you want to develop something for a new disease area, the first place to look is, where do those reservoirs of clean longitudinal data exist? And because they've made those upfront investments, they're giving the populations they serve an advantage. So the UK Biobank gives the UK population an advantage. The Mayo Clinic's large, organized, commercializable data set gives the population it serves an advantage. And so when you're starting to think about, where will I go? Where do I have data to target new solutions, new innovations to serve that population? It then becomes an accelerator. It becomes a consideration about which population you're going to be able to help first.
Another wonderful point. So data banks, you've mentioned two. Where else do you go for your data banks?
So some of the work I've done in oncology has been in the rare disease space, and then it can really be looking for a needle in a haystack. So you're looking for a series of mutations, that looking for pathology data, and certainly then you can spend a lot of time researching different biobanks. Of course, again, you always want to know which patient population do you want to serve. So are you trying to develop something for the population of China? Then you would look for the data elsewhere. If you were saying, okay, my first go-to-market strategy is the US, I would also say informed consent is a big topic. So can I use this data for secondary use? And many biobanks, many hospitals have already thought about this when they design their informed consent. Many patients, of course, have asked for this to be possible. They want it to be possible to have new treatments developed on their clinical data. And it's simply, did you think about it? So when you collected that data, did you think about, how am I using it to treat cardiovascular disease? Or did you also think, could it be used for diabetes care? Could it be used for diabetic macular edema? Could it be used for other disease areas which are coming to the right and left of the one that this patient and their data So the informed consent then becomes very important. And I would say it's something where, and it goes back into my point about the business case, you do need short-term business cases to justify the investment in this data layer. So one of the projects that I was involved in earlier in the year involved Swiss hospitals, and they're making their hospital systems more efficient. They're looking at the throughput of patients through their patient journey throughout the hospital. And of course, every part of that, from triaging to how do you organize the staff in the hospital at which time, each of these has to have a return of investment for the hospital. But at the same time, they're steadily building up this data layer which will then open up new revenue streams by itself.
So I just asked ChatGPT a question it's not used to receiving because it took a while to answer. How many biobanks are there in the world, and which countries don't offer them at all? And it struggled, but it finally spat out 2,663 unique human biobanks located in 140 countries, 2 to 3 biobanks per 1 million people globally. And do you find yourself, they appear to be homogeneous? Are they commodities? Are they equally useful, valuable in terms of the quality of the data that they offer? It sounds like the answer is no, right? Some will provide secondary usage, others won't. In terms of, some will provide conformed consent already pre-established, others won't. Do you have a bias in terms of, you want to do research on behalf of the Chinese population? Are you going to China? Some will provide, I imagine, political, regulatory, cultural obstacles that others won't. You want to do research on behalf of a population in South Africa. Do you go to a South African biobank? So just walk me through your experience of these 2,000 plus biobanks. How do you compartmentalize them?
No, it's an interesting question, Ryan. Not only has ChatGPT not been asked it before.
ChatGPT is sweating.
But even though I've done it a few times, I haven't had that question before. So first of all, for the population,
I think I'm up there competing for first place for the largest number of bizarre questions asked of ChatGPT. I'm going for the gold.
I can see that. I mean, first of all, you've got to look at the population you want to serve. So you can't easily transfer medical insights from one population to another. They are transferable learnings, but if you're developing something for a specific population, then I always go for the biobanks in that area.
Are we really that different? I mean, you would know. You're the right person to ask. Are we really that? Because I form the view that we're all a mix of everything, right? I don't want to know this about me, but I imagine there's 50 different countries that constitute who I am.
I mean, I think there's lots of things that aren't very different. I'm often telling people, for instance, who are focused on melatonin concentration, that's not the big deciding factor that they might think it is. But I would say that if I am going to, for instance, look at diabetes, and there are certain areas of the world where diabetes is more predominant, so I would most likely start with biobanks in those regions. Then as you go into the biobanks, you're absolutely right. Informed consent is the first thing you have to check. Otherwise, you can't do anything. Otherwise, you can't even get started. But you also go into the quality of the samples, and you do the quality assurance of what they have at the biobank. I will have to say, on the worst end of the spectrum, you have cases where the sex recorded for the samples, so they say these are samples from a man, you test it and it's not true and they're samples from a woman. So it's just that, are they doing a reasonably good job at this biobank of having the right data associated with the right sample and these early quality control checks that you need to do? And then what can you use this data to do? Now, ChatGPT gave you, I think, around 2,000 options. I would say there are very solid, there are very good options out there. But just last week, I was in a phone call giving some...
Imagine, just like colleges, the top 100 are much better than the bottom 2,000.
University rankings are very controversial, but yes, something along those lines. But I had a meeting last week about setting up clinical systems in Nigeria and integrated clinical data sets in Nigeria. And I think their drive behind that is they have understood that if they want to attract new clinical research to their local populations, if they want them to be involved in clinical studies, then they have to show that this infrastructure is in place. One is, of course, the biobank sampling, but the second is the integration layer. So can they share medical records? Is it possible to have a data standard that makes the data across the different hospitals interoperable? And this is a question that a lot more countries are asking themselves for their own sovereign healthcare plan. How do I make my country more attractive to commercial medtech, biotech, pharmaceutical companies that they want to come and develop new innovations and have us be one of the first entry markets for their new innovations where that's possible? And so it was very interesting to hear how Nigeria are thinking about that and bringing in quite a lot of expertise from actually the group that brought me in were Nigerians who'd worked at some of the biggest pharmaceutical companies globally, and then were keen to bring that expertise back into Nigeria.
So it seems commonsensical to say if you're a sovereign nation and you're a political class or a leadership group who wants to drive very effective drugs for your population to drive health outcomes, you want to make it as accommodating as possible for large pharmaceutical companies to engage in research with your population. So the bio data banks become very important, right? And the entire experience becomes very important. So am I warm?
I really believe that.
Okay.
I do think it's important to make innovation easy to reach your country. It's important to make innovation scalable within your country. I would say some areas where it becomes unnecessarily complicated are when there are a lot of stakeholders within that one country who all have to agree that this should happen. And I won't call out any culprits for that, but
Why not? Why
you
not?
do
Call out a culprit. That
more.
way they get better.
Well, I'll pick on one that I'm close to. So I'm a German citizen. I live here in Germany, and I do think that there are lots of benefits to the fact that we have a lot of independence between our different states and our disparate hospital chains. But I'm also a British citizen and work with UK research and innovation in the UK some of the time. And of course, there is a little more centralization in the UK system, which makes some things a little bit faster.
Would you say clinical research is easier in the UK than in Germany for that reason alone?
I think it's too bold to say. Both countries have taken the topic seriously. Both countries are doing a fantastic amount of investment in the area. I think that there is a lot of will in Germany to set up assets which make it easier for innovation to happen within Germany. You know, Germany has a very strong history of innovation, and I moved from the UK to Germany because of all of the opportunities for innovation in the biotech industry that we have here. But I would say I do really respect what happened with UK Biobank. They also have the UK Health Data Research Organisation as well, which covers the whole of the United Kingdom. And I think that sometimes it is important to have enough diverse longitudinal data that an entire country comes together and says, we prioritize this. We prioritize this to bring innovation to our country first, to reduce the cost of our healthcare because we're having better diagnosis, better early intervention. And so we're really laying down the foundations for this to happen in our country.
Yeah, I mean, this topic comes up, I wouldn't say regularly, but it has a certain pulse to it. The balance of decentralized decision-making versus centralized decision-making and, skew too far. Right? Too much centralized decision-making. We can name countries. China usually comes top of that list. Too much decentralized decision-making. India is usually an example that a lot use. By the way, the happy balance between the two, when it works well, the US, right? And when it works badly, the US. Apply to clinical research. Very interesting. Also seen it apply to many other things, building bridges and roads. So I would imagine if you're looking for centralized decision-making on clinical research, you're not flying to India.
Let's take India as an example. You do have Apollo Hospital. So you do have industry leaders who can say, look, we're going to drive something through our hospital network. We think this is important. We're going to drive it through our hospital network. And that can often be enough of a breakthrough for it then to spread to more and more parts of the country, to spread to more and more of the other hospitals that see what Apollo are doing and think, okay, I need to do that as well. And I've certainly seen that in Switzerland, where some of the hospitals moved first and then others followed because they saw the digitization that some were taking.
Another classic decentralized case study, right? Switzerland. Every village is its own fiefdom.
Well, exactly. And as you know, Roy, I'll be in Davos, and I was talking about the pain of accommodation in Davos, and it really is because it's this tiny little valley, like so many tiny little valleys in Switzerland. But I think it comes when I'm talking to a lot of hospital leaders, and I know a lot of your audience are in the healthcare, in the provider space. It's always these trade-offs as well. They probably are completely convinced in the value of data. They want to attract those new innovative clinical studies to their hospitals, but they have so many operational costs that they're dragging with them. So staff costs, which are not easy to change or to move, energy costs, which for many parts of the world have gone up significantly in the last year. So they have lots of these other difficult to move costs. And I think that's why, going back now to some of the Swiss hospitals that I worked with earlier in the year, they worked on solving some of these internal efficiency problems through digitization first. So how can I shorten waiting times? How can I make flow through the hospital faster? How can I provide remote care to more patients? And then alongside that, they were able to build up the data infrastructure needed to really transform the amount of research that was possible on the patient population they served.
How much of this is duplicitous? If I'm a health system, if I'm a CRO, clinical research organization, if I'm running research, but I'm always partnering with a life sciences company like Roche who's funding the research, how much of my data analytics capabilities are unnecessary? Just basically provide outcomes to Roche and let Roche and the Roche team led by Angeli to drive the final outcomes and findings.
So, I mean, it always comes down to the contract and what's the agreement between the pharmaceutical and the CRO. I would say that over the past 20 years, we've seen more and more accountability go out to the CROs in the contract so that they're asked to do more of the end-to-end analysis and then return the results in a way that can easily be submitted, that can be stored long term in case there are any further questions.
So it flows upstream. You're saying that the closer to the source, the analytics, probably the better off everyone is, because by the time you're asking an analytics team to get their hands dirty, if the data hasn't been optimized, then you've lost a lot of value.
I think what I'm saying more is that if you were to be able to look across the data from multiple pharmaceuticals as a CRO, and of course, whether or not you can do that depends on what's in your contracts. It also depends on how you use privacy preserving federated learning. So how do you use the technology as well as what did you put into your contracts? Then you can start to learn completely new things that no one company, no one organization on their own can discover.
That's interesting. So, I mean, I think the topic of where should the data reside, the data expertise, the analytics expertise reside, and with that, the AI, with that, the quantum computing is an interesting question across the board in healthcare and across the board in every industry, because we don't quite know the answer. And what we end up doing is over-investing and creating too much supply in analytics because everyone wants to be part of it. So we see that over here. This topic has come up, right? Large payers building tremendous analytics on their membership base. EMR companies, tremendous analytics on their customer base. Health system groups, provider groups, tremendous analytics on it. So, and now clinical research too. So everyone is analyzing to the nth degree the same patient. Eventually we'll get to a point where we can ask, well, who should be actually analyzing and who should just be a facilitator? And just, providing data, but not really understanding the data. And I think at some point the dust settles because this analytics infrastructure, this muscle that we're building is incredibly expensive. And it is fun. Everyone's forming their own conclusions, but at some point efficiency will have a role to play here, I suspect. Do you agree?
Well, that's so interesting.
They'll call it they'll call it the Bejarano theorem on AI efficiency. I've just created it, right?
I mean, I haven't heard that viewpoint before. I usually tell people, look, make sure you don't duplicate the data. Think about how you can keep the data where it is, and then you can have the model travel to the data. You can have the analytics conducted across the data, because it's very expensive to store data. It's very expensive in terms of computational power to analyze data. But I do encourage people to have data scientists in their different teams, in research, in clinical, in commercial, in the insurance companies, because they have different primary objectives. They have different questions they want to ask of the data. So even if they touch the same data, they may have completely different questions about the data. The molecular biologist in the lab may want to know, okay, what sort of targets may be affecting an adverse event. The clinician might want to know which clinical sites are operating most effectively, most efficiently, and which ones would I want to choose for a label expansion. The person who is out in the commercial discussions may want to know what insights and evidence can I share with a healthcare provider to make this a more meaningful relationship between the pharma company and the healthcare provider. And the insurance company probably wants to know what are the early indicators so we can have a better diagnostic and a better early intervention to reduce the overall cost of care. What sort of unexpected anomalies are causing an increase in healthcare? So that's why so far, Roy, I've always said, okay, you need to have people with this expertise everywhere, but just don't keep duplicating the data because that's terribly expensive. Now, what I will say, because we talked a little bit about artificial intelligence at the start of our talk, now because we have such fantastic AI engines supporting coding, you start to see more low-code solutions available. You also start to see, even for a professional software developer, the time that they need is becoming shorter, and what they can achieve just needs less man hours because of wonderful solutions that we're seeing, like Claude is an obvious one.
So talk to me about, so let me frame it this way. In 5 years, what do you think is the number one revolution happening in clinical research? And your choices could be the role of technology, whether it's AI or quantum computing. It could be the emergence of different geographic blocks to take a leadership role in clinical research that we haven't historically associated with clinical research, like China, like India. It could be other. So what do you put top of that list? What's going to be the most transformational change?
I see now I'm struggling because there are two. One is already started, but it's just not going fast enough because it's healthcare and everything goes slowly in healthcare. So one is decentralized care. So having care from your own home. Having care from your own home becomes cheaper and cheaper and cheaper every year. So once a year I go to IFA, which is the Consumer Electronics Conference here in Berlin. And every year you start to see the battery life on home devices, the affordability of home devices become better and better and better. So having something that can detect whether or not you're having a fall, having automated filling of prescriptions, these things are just naturally getting better every year. So 5 years from now.
So the emergence of true RPM, remote patient.
Exactly.
We won't use patient, we'll use the word public, remote public monitoring.
Exactly. And that's just going to happen. You see, every year it's improving, it's becoming more accessible to a larger and larger part of the population.
I'm being monitored as we speak. I've got my boot.
I find the US is quite far ahead in its adoption, but this is something where we see it coming more and more and more. Germany has an interesting history with data privacy and data privacy concerns as well, which sometimes makes adoption of these technologies a little slower here. If we then look, though, to the locations of clinical studies, I mean, absolutely spot on with India and China. So one of Sequoia Growth's longest customers is a group based out in India, and there is just such a rapid growth in the amount of high quality clinical research biotechs that are growing there. It's always been there. It's been there for a long time, but it's really starting to expand. The innovation and also the attention that innovation is getting from the rest of the world is growing rapidly. And in China, of course, we've seen.
And that complements the post-COVID era that we've entered into of build it yourself, control it yourself, emergency drug, supply. I need the entire infrastructure. I need the whole industry here versus the world is flat.
Exactly.
I can't remember the Harvard author that wrote that. Probably should remember his name. Maybe it's too early in the morning for me. But the world is not flat anymore, is it?
I had a discussion earlier this week. So earlier this week, I was with a German pharma medtech group, and there it was about the raw materials. So, okay, you can have the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient produced here in Germany. You can have the assembly of the medtech device here in Germany. But if your raw materials are still coming from somewhere else in the world, then that's a critical part of your supply chain. If we have another pandemic, if we have more global uncertainty, that's going to cause some topics, some issues for Europe, and certainly is something that can be at odds with our wish in Europe to be more environmentally friendly. There's a reason that we're not producing these raw materials across Europe at the moment, why it is more expensive to start to produce them here as well.
It's a fascinating topic. It's worthy of another hour discussion, which we're going to do another time. But the whole evaluation of a supply chain, what does it mean to control a supply chain? Well, you need to control raw materials. You need to control the actual intellectual property. So that means you need to control the clinical research, because the research is what drives the intellectual property. So other than that, you're in a third-party supply agreement. You might feel like you have a lot of control. It's a long-term agreement. It comes with plenty of excess. But at the end of the day, you either control the entire supply chain or you're reliant on others. And you're as strong as your weakest chain in that supply chain, right?
Exactly. And it's all about risk. So trying to predict what sort of a political risk we can expect in the coming year, trying to predict that out for the next 5 years, because we all know that manufacturing sites are long-term, are very expensive investments, and production facilities for the raw materials needed by those manufacturing sites are also expensive long-term investments. I certainly think that we in Europe should be doing more to think about our essential medicine supply chain, which is why I was part of those meetings this week. But as you say, it's not a trivial topic. We set ourselves up.
No, you can achieve much and bring a lot home, and still, the odds are 99% that what you've built for yourself won't be applicable for the next crisis.
Exactly.
So managing expectations becomes the primary task here. Like, yes, we don't want to look like we've outsourced everything in the middle of a crisis when every sovereign nation is focused on themselves, naturally. But the odds of you domesticating the need that you'll need for any one of 1 trillion potential crisis options, I would imagine, are quite low. Doesn't mean that you don't make steps, right? Having a clinical research muscle to be able to evaluate, great. But you probably still won't have the raw materials that you need. And you probably won't have the intellectual property you need for just the drug that's just right for that one pandemic, that one virus that revealed itself, right? So very slippery slope, very interesting topic. We're going to get to it next time. But Angeli, I want to thank you for your time this morning, and looking forward to staying in touch and continuing our discussion.
Thank you so much, Roy. And I'll wish you a good evening, because that's my time zone. And thank you for our conversation.
Thank you for joining us on Analyzing Healthcare. Stay informed and stay inspired. Don't forget to subscribe and visit scale-community.com to become a Scale Community member. Until next time, keep exploring the ideas that shape our healthcare systems.